Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm gonna share two composition rules that are gonna instantly up your composition game. One is basic, one is pretty advanced, but both are gonna help to avoid mistakes and to make your design and composition look much better. So the first one is the proximity rule from the Gestalt principles. This is pretty basic information, but if we scale it up a little bit, we can avoid a lot of mistakes that are being repeated over and over again. So without further ado, let's get started. So here we have two words, and the distance between the letters needs to be less than the distance between two words. And that's the basic idea of the proximity rule. But then if we try to scale it up a little bit, we get the second line. And here you notice that the distance between two words is bigger than the distance between two lines, whereas logically the second line is considered as one object and the first line is considered as another one. So we need to add a little bit more space here so that we still keep that logic of inner and outer rule. So the same would apply to if we add additional element like a description or subtitle. Here we see that the distance between the description and the second line is less than the distance between the two lines of the title, which makes it problematic because now the description starts to mess with the second line. So we need to add a bit more space as well so that we can easily separate these two groups from each other. And the same would be applied for the larger description. It just doesn't make sense to keep it that close to the second line. So always keep in mind that inner and outer rule. So the inner is less than the outer. So here, if we start to scale it up even further, we see that the image is very close to the title, which is breaking the rule because we need to consider the title and the text as one object and then the image as another one. So if we push it down a little bit, now we can clearly separate between the text and the image. Here's another example. We have grid of the elements with the images and the text. And from the first glance, it's not that easy to understand where does this text belong to. Obviously, we can understand that the text is belonging to the image above, but we need to make it even easier to understand. When you are scrolling down the page, you don't have to think about that. You need to grasp it right away. That's why we just add a bit more spacing between here, and then we just decrease the spacing between the title and the image. Now going back to the title, we have text in the corner. We have nice inner and outer rule here. But what would happen if we move it down? Now we see that there is this huge space and the composition is not adhering the proximity rule. And at the same time, it looks kind of interesting. So the thing is that in the composition, there are different forces that are fighting each other. And sometimes you can apply one or another based on your goal. So if you want to create the tension in your design, this is one of the techniques to basically break the proximity rule, to add a bit more of the spacing, and that creates that interesting look. It's holding much more energy. It's not static, it's ready to move. But tension is something that we need to be careful with because it's not for beginners. It's a very risky tool to use, and yes, you can achieve much more interesting look, but at the same time, first you need to learn basics. So before you even start doing super cool flips and stunts on your bicycle, you want to first learn how to ride it, right? The same way you have to work with the basics of the proximity, of the visual balance, and then you can start to break the visual balance, to break the rule. So the basic rule is know the rules before you start breaking them. So let's have a look at some of the examples from the graphic design, from the print design, and some of the latest web examples. that we can take the inspiration from, that we can understand how it is applied. By the way, I really advise UI designers to have a look at print design as source of inspiration, because we have much bigger history in print design, whereas for web we have just 20, 30 years, and only like last 5, 10 years we got much less restrictions in terms of feasibility, in terms of typography and stuff. So we can find lots of those advanced techniques in print design. So here's one of the examples where we have this huge space below and also here, which really emphasize the text that we have here. So the designer could have spread out the text on this page and made it like in the center, maybe that would like fill it, maybe it would be balanced in the center, but he really wanted to add this tension, to draw eye, to make this page standing out, and especially this text. And also here we have these huge breaks from the title to the text, and the text starts only from the center of the page, and that is sabotage way of breaking the rule of proximity, but that's the intention. Basically, we see that the titles are close to each other and much more far away from its corresponding text. But first of all, we have columns that are having these power lines, and they are so powerful that they hold the column tight and don't allow to mix the titles with each other. That's why it's kind of easy to understand that this title belongs to this text. But at the same time, we create this super interesting look, and that wouldn't be possible to achieve starting the text from right here. Same thing happens here. We have a huge space here in between these two texts. From the first glance, it's unused space, but it really adds the visual interest and the tension, and that's done intentionally, and it makes these two guys to stand out, and you want to kind of travel your eye between these two objects, which makes it more explorable. So here's another example from web, and this is done by famous designer Gina Rinjuk. She really nails this graphic tension. You can see that a lot in her works. And it doesn't mean that you have to just add the spacing. It can be some lines, additional elements, it can be some graphics. But overall, the idea is to create that tension. So far, we talked about the space gaps that add the graphic tension, but there is also another tools. For example, here, the famous graphic designer from 20th century, Franzoni, he really loves to play with tension, and the way these lines are touching the border, it creates the tension, and also the way it's tilted to the right also adds up to that. So here, again, the same way Franzoni does lots of tension based on the corners and the way these shapes are close to each other, and the text here is almost touching the circle, which kind of makes you not comfortable, but at the same time it's interesting to look at. Here we have another example of probably maximum tension possible in this canvas. We have, first of all, huge space from top, so it's kind of pushed to the bottom. We have these acute angles all over this canvas, and very compact, tight typography here, which all adds up to that craziness and tension that's in this canvas. Really nice example. So here again, we have typography close to the edges, and if we were to make this composition to breathe, to add a bit more space, that wouldn't really work, because now we lose that power and tension that was there before, and you kind of don't understand now why is it aligned like this. Another example from Kurpohosk. Lots of takeaway from this website, but we're going to just focus on how they break the proximity rule. So now this title, instead of being close to the description, it's all the way to the left and almost touching the border of the canvas. So now going back to the proximity rule, we can actually bring the second line closer, but maybe we need to adjust the letter spacing a bit, which would allow us to even bring it further. And we still are breaking the proximity rule here because the distance between the two words is bigger than the distance between the two lines. But because we adjusted the letter spacing, and depending on our style and approach, we can actually apply this rule. So the same way you can see that Ben Mingo is doing in one of his works, the spacing here is not adhering the proximity rule, but at the same time it looks super cool. If we want to apply even more tension, we can decrease the distance between these two guys and displace the second one. That way it's getting another separation layer, which is the position of second and first line, and it helps us to distinguish between these two. There are lots of rules and forces that affect the way composition looks like. It's not only proximity or tension, and I'm gonna be covering much more in next videos, but I find this topic very fascinating. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Your opinion is really appreciated. And don't forget to like and subscribe to see more videos like this. Until the next time.